Okay.
Okay. Amy, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you. Sorry. Appreciate it.
We can hear you. Perfect.
Great. Great.
She just left, so I'm not going to start unless she comes back. Okay. Cool. All right. Welcome, everyone. I am going to pinch hit until Matt DeFronte gets here, or if he doesn't, then I'll just keep on going. It's all good. We're all friends here, right? So welcome to the April 16th joint meeting of the MVTC WMATA Committee and Legislative and Policy Committee. Like to note that we are starting the meeting at 6:04. The meeting is being streamed live on MVTC's YouTube page, and I believe, looking over at, we have quorum. We are good to go. Acknowledging other commissioners attending, we have our MVTC alternate DRPT Chief Deputy Director, Alan Fry. Welcome back, Alan. We also welcome a new MVTC staff member, Deputy Director of Programs and Policy, Amanda Singh. Hello, Amanda. Thank you for waving. She will be working with the Legislative and Policy Committee as we move forward. And now we have our January 29th Joint Committee meeting summary in your meeting material. Does anyone have any comments, adjustments, general thoughts out there? Seeing none, we're going to go ahead and move that along, so that's good. So tonight we are joined by WMATA Inspector General Michelle Zamarin, who will speak a bit about her office's recent audit and investigation work. Committee members will recall her visit to the Commission in October of 2024, shortly after her tenure as Inspector General began. As a reminder, the WMATA Inspector General reports to the WMATA Board and is charged with promoting efficiency and effectiveness in WMATA activities, namely by conducting and supervising audits, program evaluations, and investigations. We have a fantastic opportunity to leverage each other's efforts as we at NVTC continue to identify ways to reduce costs and improve operational efficiencies at WMATA. The floor is yours.
Thank you, everyone. As I was introduced, I'm Michelle Zamarin. I'm from the Office of Inspector General. I have asked to come back this year again because I think it's very important that the NVTC has full access to my office to understand what we're doing, what we're working on, and as we begin our audit planning season, that you have some input into what we decide to do and look at. And you have Darian Flowers and you have Walter Acorn, who I see on a regular basis at board meetings and present to on a regular basis. Excuse me for a moment. So I do want to encourage you, based on anything I say today or anything I miss, that please share with them any ideas you have, any thoughts, or any way that we can help. Also provide any assistance to you from our office. But I did want to start with, since I've been here, it's been a while, that was back in 2024, for the focusing on really the past year. We've had some investigations that I think created a significant impact within WMATA. I do want to start with, when I came last time, I was following after there had been some question as to the independence of my office and the relationship with management. And I want to make sure that everyone understands now that I have had I found the environment supportive. We have a good working relationship. I meet regularly with all of the members of the executive team and of course with the Chief Executive Officer. We have input from them into our audit plans and into an open door policy with them as well. But none of that has affected our independence in any way, and I have not felt in the past year that there has been any challenge to my independence. We continue to investigate and audit anything that we think is the right things to look at and review. So this past year, we did an audit on data protection and privacy that was just released. Right before that, we did accounts payable. But there is an audit that I wanted to focus on just to sort of give you an understanding of how my office is a little different, or we are creating an environment that allows people to come forward and work with us a little more. When we did our ERP audit, if you're familiar with ERP implementations, you'll know that they are usually processes that never go well. For WMATA, it's probably the largest modernization project they have right now. Started out as a $226 million anticipated budget. It is now actually on the budget for that. But what was happening is we were receiving in my office input on our hotline, people who worked with us regularly reaching out to say that they had concerns about the process, about the ERP implementation, and that WMATA was not at what it was paying. And so, of course, one of my biggest concerns is making sure taxpayer dollars are being used in the best way possible. But what we did with that audit that is a little different, but is also something that we are trying to repeat, is that while we were doing our review, instead of completing the final audit report, we first went to a management assistance report. So, which means that we brought our concerns seeing earlier than we would have for the final audit. But even before that, the other thing we did was we sat down and met with WMATA before we had anything in writing to tell them what we were seeing. And the reason I'm emphasizing that is it was that we were sharing this information. It then allowed them to make changes. And so if you look at our audit report, it addresses first what the structure was. It addresses some of the changes that are still the structure today as to what they made as to the ERP program. But what we were seeing with that program itself was that it was being run by contractors. And why that caused a problem is they weren't engaging WMATA employees who are the stakeholders. They weren't actually listening to what the people who work day in and day out needed, what they wanted to have done, and what would make the ERP the most successful. So we made recommendations in that management assistance report that they have a program set up where they are engaging the stakeholders more. And from the updates that I've received so far, it appears that this is actually what is now happening. We'll have our full audit report on that coming up within the next few months. The other thing that I wanted to update you on were some changes I made within my own group on how one of my groups operate. We have something called a contract audit group. This is not something that I had ever seen in my experience at any other OIG before, but that's because most of the ones I'm familiar with are federal, and this work is done at a separate federal agency. And what it is that the contract audit group does is they look at contracts pre-negotiation. And so they come in and they will test the financial capability of companies. They will look at the billing rates, and they will do things called a contract analysis, where they do a deep dive into the overhead that a company is proposing. And it's done pre-negotiation, so before WMATA signs the contract. This is something that at first, when I looked at it, I thought, why would we be doing this? It should be part of the procurement process. I am now completely convinced that it sits where it sits for a good reason. It was back in 2007, the WMATA board assigned it to my office. And what it does is it is a powerful tool for WMATA itself in negotiations. So we are able to say, this is where we see that there are costs and overhead that are not allowable. And it then allows the negotiation for a better price for WMATA before they sign the contracts. However, the way it was being run when I arrived was that WMATA would pick the contracts, or the contracting officers would pick what contracts to look at. And there was no risk analysis. There was no evaluation of, is something a sole source? Is it already competitively bid? And we had never seen an IT contract, which is something that is always a big dollar amount that should be of a concern. So starting this past June, we set up a new program. In our new program, we have a risk-based analysis. We sit with procurement each month. They identify what contracts are the new contracts that are coming in. We pick based on our own risk analysis. We also have a threshold levels for what contracts we're looking at. We prioritize sole source. We prioritize new contractors who have not been a part of the WMATA environment before. And we will also prioritize IT. And the results of that The other thing we've added in is also some more transparency to the board. So we now, on a quarterly basis, provide reporting to the board where they can see what contracts come in, that we are looking at, the savings that we have recommended, if any, and then what was the final negotiated price. We also started an entrance and exit conference. And the reason I'm emphasizing that is because it is a time where WMATA can sit with my auditor and with the contractor, and everyone is in the same room together. And before the audit begins, the contractor is explained why we're doing it, what we're looking for. And then when at the end of the audit, the contractor has an opportunity to say whether or not they agree with that. But then it also allows WMATA to go back and have to say these are whether or not they agree with our recommendations. So we're trying to provide more transparency to the board. We're trying to provide more support to WMATA in the negotiations. And just by example, we've recently looked at a contract, let's see what the number was. So we give these quarterly reports, but just by example, we had a contract where we made a reduction recommendation of $14 million in the last quarter report. Not all of them are that big. We also had one where we recommended a $25,000 reduction. Both of those were followed though, and so that the final contract price was reduced by that amount. Another one that we did a couple months ago, we recommended a $5.5 million deduction, and WMATA actually negotiated a 6.6 million deduction. So it's just putting a little more power in the hands of the people who are doing the contracts. The other thing that I am doing right now is what I've been calling a sort of a roadshow. It's an outreach to as many departments as I can get to within WMATA to talk about the investigations and audits we've done this past year. And I think that's important because I don't expect that everyone who works about WMATA reads my audits or my semi-annual report. And so I think it's important that they know what's going on inside the organization and what we're seeing. And one of the focuses right now for me is the conflicts of interest. We had a lot of investigations this past year that were related to conflicts of interest. If something becomes criminal, then it becomes public. If it doesn't become, and it just sort of gets a couple lines in my semi-annual. And so I don't feel like the investigations that the employees of WMATA benefit from this knowledge unless I'm out there doing that. And it's actually by the executive team, and they're helping to set up so that I'm actually meeting with most of their teams through the next couple months to share these examples of what we saw and how they can avoid hopefully getting in the same situation. This coming year, some of you may be familiar with the IJA requirements with the funding for IJA, that we owe a 5-year report to Congress that is due in November. So there was a 2-year report at which time my office looked at, does WMATA have in place the tools to effectively manage the funding? What we look at now is, did they effectively manage the funding? What were the results? How did they use the money? There will be no surprises in the report because it's mostly based on the audits that we've done for the past 5 years, but it will be one place where all of that information is put together. It will give the opportunity for Congress and all of you to see for the last 5 years what we have found. I will caveat that with, usually when we start an audit because there's a reason that we've identified a problem. So we typically aren't going in and auditing something because we know it's going well. So of course, most of our reports are going to find that there will be improvements that could be made. But overall, our audit planning for the next year will start now, and our final report will be in September. I do hope that you take the opportunity to provide your representatives on our board some of your thoughts, things that you think we could benefit from. We sit one-on-one. Mr. Flowers will be able to sit with my team, talk about what he's seen since he's been here for his time. And really, it's important for us to know from people who see this from different angles and different areas that we're incorporating as much knowledge as we can. And that is one of the reasons this past audit plan, we interviewed not just the executive team and board members, but we went down multiple layers of managers and took a lot more time, but it provided us what I thought was a lot more substantive information from people who are truly the managers at the level that are seeing the daily processes. So we have, but that's been our year for the past year.
Thank you, Michelle. And I kept wondering if everybody tries to call you General Sam. It just seems a little.
Only the people who are trying to mock me a little. Not you, but some of my friends.
I was trying to figure out how I could make fun of the construct while being fully respectful. Your
No, don't worry.
prior presentation, when you came the first time to NVTC, was, as I indicated, stunningly coherent and felt like a closing argument. And given your legal background, that's wonderful. We do have a question from Mr. Guda.
And sorry, not so much of a question, just more so a comment. First of all, thank you for being here and thank you for mentioning somewhat tumultuous time within your position before you coming on. There was a lot of things that were going on. And so it's very encouraging to hear that you feel supported, that you like the environment, and that essentially there are other things that you're seeing that are getting done. Because I think being a year into the position, it's very telling. Yeah, things are still kind of, and we'd have a lot more to discuss. So appreciate the update. Thank you.
And it's been support from the board as well. So, and I think my team very much appreciated the support from the board.
Yeah, I'm just an alternate. You lead.
No, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to also say in this setting how much I appreciate this with the few months I've been able to work with Michelle and her team thus far, how fantastic of a collaboration it's been. From my prior day jobs working in Congress, I have a great admiration for the role of the IG and value that it can bring to any organization, as many, I think all of us, right, who work with IGs in our day jobs can attest. But also, I really do think Michelle and her team's approach has been very collaborative and I think helpful for the organization. She talked about this idea of working to what I would describe as close the loop with employees as it relates to we as an organization benefit from the fact that employees have used the various tools they have to report. And as Michelle said, that there's some of this kind of what I would describe as tension, right? Because the fact is that she and her team obviously does a thorough investigation, but it always doesn't lead to an outcome that always might let the employee know, hey, actually, my ability to say I'm going to do the right thing led to an action, led to an outcome, right? That held someone accountable. And I just want to commend her and her team's work for doing that, because I think that's very, very important. We have an incredibly dedicated workforce at Metro who wants to have the system operate at the peak capacity, that wants to operate with integrity, and they, use the tools that Michelle's office has set up so that they can do that, and that she's created an environment where they also feel that their work is not only heard, actioned, and then reported back to them. So I just really want to thank her for all of that work. We, the board, I think, feel very well informed. And if I can speak for my colleague, probably Director Alcorn also as well, right? He shared the same sentiment. So we're very pleased to work with.
Thank you both. Are there other questions or comments? I certainly think as we consider, this is after so much of the history of the role, this is a resource. I want to think about going forward as we mindful that there are many different reporting mechanisms that Metro has to handle. And so it may be that I'm hopeful that the integrity and the strength of the office might translate into some efficiency as we think about kind of going forward.
And that is something I have offered, that I do think that we can be a place that we can help offer some insight in different ways to help manage a few things. Particularly when it's looking at that there are multiple jurisdictions that are involved in looking at the same thing. So we are absolutely happy to help in any way that we can.
Thank you very much, and mindful. Thank you also for making the extra effort to be with us tonight. You probably had multiple opportunities to be out in the evening. So showing up here, we're super grateful. And with that, you're welcome to stay, but you sure don't have to.
Thank you.
But we'll go on, if that's okay, to on this, unless there's closing other thoughts, update on this year's report on the performance and condition of WMATA. It seems like we just finished and we're on the next. State code requires NVTC to report on key WMATA performance measures and uses the report as an opportunity to discuss issues of importance related to WMATA. Our 2025 report highlighted the Commission's support for a long-term sustainable funding solution, among our other priorities. Mr. Hager will cover the requirements, topics, and timeline for the 2026 report. Adam, over to you.
Thank you, Chair DeFranchi. So for the committee this year on the report on the performance and condition. This will be the ninth iteration of this report, and the requirements are detailed here on this slide for reference. I won't go through all of them. I think everybody's pretty well familiar with them at this point. But again, as the chair mentioned, beyond the requirements that are listed here, the commission does use this report to document positions on. Do a quick recap here of the 2025 report, which, as you did point out, was just approved 4 months ago. It does feel like yesterday, but here we are again. So again, a quick reminder of what we covered, the focus again of which was that long-term funding solution for Metro. We also documented DMV moves, SJ 28, and the Commission's transit funding principles that were adopted. And lastly, as required, we included opportunities for WMATA to control its cost growth and increase revenues, and we'll dive into some of those on the next slides. So both on this slide and the next, we have several issues that the Commission has prioritized in recent reports that we're looking to continue. I think what we wanted to do is spend some time first reminding committee members of these priorities, hearing any feedback or questions on these concepts, other areas of interest that we should look to address in this year's report. So our goal here really is to develop some actionable recommendations that will keep Metro performing and operating. The first here is labor costs and overtime. We noted in the last report how Metro has made progress toward controlling labor costs with the latest round of CBAs, but there remains significant long-term employment benefit obligations, many of which Metro does not have direct control over. Metro has also seen an upturn in overtime, more on overtime than its peers. So as we develop recommendations on this topic, we are hoping to leverage the work that went to Metro board last month to continue, again, urging Metro to find opportunities to control its labor cost growth. Next is an operating reserve fund. This topic of an operating reserve fund has been around for some time, most recently established one through board policy. But there were some circumstances that were different, and again, we're proposing to continue recommending that Metro establish one at the right time. Next slide. Third item is Metro's reporting requirements. There are over 10 laws, regulations, and agreements that spell out 65 plus different requirements for Metro, which can lead to duplication of effort and additional administrative burdens for staff. There were a couple bills in Virginia this last session that sought to simplify some of these requirements and ultimately did not move forward. So we will continue working with Metro and regional partners to move the. And last year is the concept of coordinated jurisdictional subsidy. This has been a long-standing issue after a series of audits 8 to 10 years ago, lacked a standardized process and produced competing findings. So we see this as a worthwhile. This kind of audit would be subsidy formula and calculations to ensure that every funding jurisdiction is contributing what's owed and mitigate the risk of uncoordinated audits. So as far as timeline and next steps, we'll hold a workshop again at our June committee meeting and have a deeper dive on the latest overtime costs at that. I'll hold a briefing this fall before taking a report to the commission. First, for an overview in November, followed by adoption in December. As always, the report is due by December 15th. So happy to take questions and hear your thoughts and feedback on those topics or others.
Thank you, Adam. Questions, comments? You notice part of a slide referred to consolidation in the number of reporting documents, which rang a bell with the presentation. Other thoughts, comments? Go ahead, Aaron. Any others?
Mr. Chairman, I would just say is that I agree, right, is that particularly, right, we have a very, very capable and competent OIG staff, right? I think that working across the jurisdictions, right, to remove the duplication and leverage the fact that we have an OIG and then get economies of scale from that, I think we would all benefit from. So listen, Adam's report, and at least this presentation speaks for itself. The things that I will offer to this group in terms of just high level of where we sit. So FY26, for WMATA, we are financially stable, but balance is achieved through stronger than expected revenue rather than cost control, right? So I would think that is something that, is consistent, right, with Adam's findings. For FY27, the revised budget that the board has discussed, right, reduces subsidy growth, right, from 3% to 1.8%. And that many of you may know that is driven by our friends and colleagues in Maryland, and what is frankly a frustrating situation that this jurisdiction has placed the other jurisdictions into, and what is, I think, kind of counterproductive in some of the efforts that my predecessors and many in this room took to get a regional approach to invest in the system, right? That this is challenging, and we, myself and Director Alcorn and others, right, have shared that with our friends in Maryland, and they understand the limitations for that. But it can't be underscored that the decisions we've had to make in order to accommodate one jurisdiction are going to lead to the following: service deferrals, modest revenue increases, and one-time measures that are not sound financial management. The system, as we understand, faces these kind of structural imbalances, right, driven by labor costs, paratransit growth, and limited fare box recovery. These are things that are not new to probably anyone in this room, and I think that the way I would describe the board's discussions, though, are very collaborative. All there's a sober and clear-eyed understanding of where we are. Right, and I think we're looking to take steps to address most of these, but we will also need, I think, to be innovative in some of them about how we approach them, particularly as it relates to what I describe as strengthening the user pay model. And that understanding is that there are some routes within the system, right, particularly in the bus environment, where we have 80 to 90% non-compliance as it relates to fare box recovery. And this is going to require some innovation in how we address this. And I think that management has an appreciation for that. Understand it's going to work with us, but there is going to be some innovation and need. So that's where we stand. We are, all encouraged by what I think is the best management team in the business that we have at WMATA, led by our general manager, who is, I think, is a transformational leader that the system deserves and needs. And at least I can say as one director, though, despite all what I just said, I'm very encouraged about the direction of the system. I'm happy to take any questions from you all, my colleagues.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aaron, Mr. Flowers. Are there questions? Yes, Mr. Snyder.
In view of public commentary on Anthropic's decision not to release an AI system because it is so dangerous to other AI operating systems, to what extent, and this is something I hope is a cybersecurity issue, because while AI failure in financial services, where I work, it's dollars and cents, AI failure on a transit system is life and death. So without overly dramatizing it, which I just did, I'm very interested in making a point about cybersecurity and making sure that we have the redundant ability to operate, to first of all deal with an event, and then to continue to operate the system after that. So I'm very interested in this security and safety issue. Also, WTOP has covered a couple of high-profile killings right outside metro stations. And I know Metro significantly upped its police and its safety. I mean, I ride Metro virtually every day, so for me, I experienced the successes and it's incredible the progress that we've made. So I don't want to overdo the negatives here, but does this suggest something that needs to be addressed by the Metro system? In other words, are localities giving Metro the support that it ought to have to prevent incidents from happening near the system?
Yes, sir. Well, let me take this last bit first, right? Is that, yeah, unfortunately, right, in the last, really, 2 weeks, we've had some incidences of violence, right, on or near Metro property. I want to be mindful of the specifics and not get ahead of the MTPD in terms of these like investigations. But from what we as the board have been briefed is that, at least in one of these incidents, unfortunately, this is more associated with issues related to relationship violence versus any kind of associated threat to the system, and that unfortunately, that this was associated with, you know, employees in a kind of a domestic manner. And while tragic, right, that's isolated. The most recent incident that we understand, right, is that you know, I haven't been briefed about the specifics of it from the transit police, so that's something that I'm happy to ask the chief about. I think one of the things that I will emphasize is that we're at a 40-year low across crime on the system, which is fantastic. And that I think your comments that talk about the feeling that it seems like that our customers have around the public safety situation improving is manifesting itself in the FY26 budget that we're seeing. Revenue, because of ridership growth, is higher than we expected. And I think that is a testament to how our customers are starting to use and experience the system. Like any other major system, right, in a metropolitan area, I think we have public safety challenges, but I have the utmost confidence in the chief, the utmost confidence in Randy that this is a top priority. And then, you know, I can say as one director, we take it very seriously. Your comments about cyber are timely. This is something that the board was that we benefited from a briefing from Michelle's office around this and had a robust discussion in a closed session. And it's something that, you know, we see, at least for me, in terms of my responsibility outside of attracting and retaining top talent, is managing enterprise risk in collaboration with the management team. And this is something, you know, that we see as management is aware of and is appropriately attentive to.
I'm just, in our report, I'm just trying to raise the issues that are important to the public. It doesn't take too many incidents to destroy a reputation,
Totally.
which Metro has rightly built up for a very safe system. You're absolutely right, the data is there.
Yeah.
But it's, in my view, it's something and I'm not saying you're not, but we need to keep the pressure on day in and day out.
Listen, I think I agree. I mean, this is also talking about maybe some of the bits around innovation that I mentioned before, is that, you know, I think there's always opportunity for greater partnership amongst our regional law enforcement groups, and taking some of the lessons, right, that other agencies even in the region have benefited from, right? Our friends at the DRE have a high proportion of riders that are federal law enforcement officers, right, that ride, you know, their systems. And it's my understanding that from their management is that there is a program that they have that allows for federal law enforcement officers who ride the VRE as passengers, right, take some kind of specific training, right, around the transit environment or rail environment that allows them to kind of, for lack of a better term, be kind of a force multiplier to then the law enforcement systems that that secure the VRE system. And then, they as a passenger get a benefit for reduced fare, right? Those are things that I know that the chiefers at MTPD are thinking about, right? And they do some other kinds of unique trainings, but I share your concern with you, right? Is that that particularly in transportation, there are tools that we have to do to actually secure the system, but it's equally as important as that there are tools we have to deploy that show our customers the confidence that they have that the system is indeed safe. And those things are equally important across any mode of transportation, but particularly one like that's ours, that's large, dispersed, and porous.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the questions. And yeah, go ahead, Matt.
First of all, I'm enjoying Darian getting all these questions. A little refreshing. You did a great job. Great job.
Thank you.
Hopefully we set you up for success.
Yes, very much so.
I just want to make a point quickly on the operating reserve funds, which was something I tried to do when I was finance chair and met a lot of resistance. I don't know if that's come up recently, but it strikes me that, given the situation that with our other jurisdictions with the 27 budget, the objections were coming from the other jurisdictions. So this is something Virginia supported and management supported, but the other two jurisdictions were not enthusiastic about. I can't imagine there's going to be any traction now. The comment was made, we are the reserve funds, because Metro ultimately would turn to the jurisdictional partners for more money if ended up needing it. Our argument was that we could manage the system a lot better and be more self-sufficient if we had a cushion, and we weren't in that mode of turning jurisdictions, and you could basically rely on the fact that what we asked for was what we asked for. I think it's fine to have in the report, but I also don't want to put something out there that seems like it's not even remotely kind of in the conversation. So I'll leave that I'll sort of pose that thought. Maybe not something that's emphasized, but just calling back to MVTC's past support for that, and the fact that Virginia and management, I think, thinks it's a good operating principle. But it strikes me as being, not really in the conversation, given what you're experiencing.
I think that's super helpful. I always feel like when they're writing these reports, it's like reading the tea leaves from these conversations is not simple, but I do appreciate the strategic advice. And I also think your answers were super helpful on AI and in general, but I just want to underscore a little bit, at least as you're consolidating and starting to write, consider where AI would fit strategically, just like you're considering Matt's point on the slide that you have. But I agree, it's great to hear Matt encouraging others and not feeling wistful in the center of other things. Are there other comments or questions? Super helpful, and this is the moment where I get to hand it over to Kaneko for the legislative piece, although I think it's possible that Senator Salim will tell us all about what's going to happen in the next 10 days.
With that crystal ball. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We do have several state and federal updates for the committee. The General Assembly concluded last month, and the deadline for the governor to act on it passed. So legislative activity. However, as the General Assembly reconvenes Wednesday to consider the vetoes and recommendations, there will be a follow-up on Thursday to finalize the state budget. With that timeline in mind, I'm going to turn it over to METC Program Analyst Owen Williams, who will discuss the key transit legislation that passed, as well as studies that were signed to DRPT. He'll then briefly update us on the policies that DRPT is advancing with guidance from TSDAC, the Transit Service Delivery Advisory Committee. And after that, we'll have our legislative liaison, Ms. Amy Perrin-Seibert, provide an update on remaining legislative items, most notably the state budget, and share what she is hearing on the ground in Richmond as negotiations continue. And the final details are still being worked out. Maybe slide in a little bit of Senator Salim. And after that, we'll have some questions before going to the federal update. So, Mr. Williams.
So, as you said, several transit-related bills were passed by the General Assembly this session and signed into law by the governor. Starting with HB 200, this bill updates the Transit Ridership Incentive Program, including adjusting the program scope and initiating a statewide review of program guidelines through TSDAC, which is now underway. It also removes prior requirements related to WMATA reform coordination and extends authority for law enforcement enforcement of bus shelter building code provisions. Next, HB 330 allows for advertising on WMATA-owned property near highways, creating an additional opportunity for non-fare revenue. This is primarily focused on signage on parking structures adjacent to highways and also would require federal approval. And HB 547 and SB 731 from Senator Salim related to transit workforce standards would require contracted transit agencies to provide the same compensation and benefits that public employees receive. And DRPT will lead a work group to develop implementation guidance for localities. And it should be noted that the governor has amended this legislation to delay enactment to July 1, 2027, and require the General Assembly to reenact the legislation in the 2027 session, assuming those recommendations are upheld next week during the reconvened session. And lastly, with HB 564 and SB 583, also from Senator Salim, authorize the use of bus lane and bus stop enforcement cameras. And this is something that WMATA has been seeking as part of its Clear Lanes program and is intended to improve bus reliability and shorten travel times. And any citation revenue from these new enforcement mechanisms would flow to localities consistent with standard parking enforcement. And lastly, two additional rail-related bills were also signed. HB 141 expands exemptions for VPRA to streamline procurement and project delivery, and HB 446 expands to exercise eminent domain in support of passenger rail projects. In addition to legislation, there are also several studies and reports that have been assigned to DRPT this year. First, DRPT has been directed to review WMATA's cost efficiency and identify potential savings with the reports due in October. Second, there is a Northern Virginia focused study evaluating the feasibility of consolidating several local bus systems into a unified regional bus system. That report is due November 1 and is supposed to assess costs, operations, governance, and seek public input. And there's also a Northern Virginia focused study led by the Secretary of Transportation's office and the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment, focused on evaluating revenue options and potential estimates for a parking services tax in the Northern Virginia Transportation District. And related to the contracted transit workforce legislation discussed on the previous slide, DRPT will convene that work group, as we mentioned, to develop recommendations for implementation, and those will inform General Assembly consideration ahead of potential reenactment. And so finally, DRPT, in coordination with the Department of Housing and Community Development, will conduct a statewide study on transit-oriented development, including funding opportunities and barriers to housing and economic development. And it is worth noting that most of these studies were proposed as budget amendments, and their implementation is contingent on inclusion in the final state budget, which has not yet been adopted. Next slide. And lastly, DRPT is continuing to work with TISDAC to develop recommendations on updates to the Merit Operating Assistance Program and TRIP. And this includes both how operating assistance funding is distributed across agencies and how performance is measured. As mentioned earlier, the TRIP review was initiated by House Bill 200. And NVTC staff here has been actively coordinating with our local jurisdictions and transit agencies to gather feedback and to ensure that Northern Virginia perspectives are reflected as these recommendations are developed. The current timeline anticipates recommendations advancing to the CTB later this fall. And so with that, I will now pass it over to Amy to provide an update on what she's hearing down in Richmond.
Great. Well, good evening, everybody. Also want to make sure I introduce the other two members of our team who are here on Zoom with me too, which I think they're probably popping off their thing. So Henry Watkins and Jennifer Foster, who have been helping with MVTC at the General Assembly. So wanted to make sure that you guys saw them as well. So this is a team effort, although I'm giving the presentation, they certainly helped me do that today. Obviously, unfortunately, I wish I was coming with better news. I don't come bearing any good news at all about the budget next week. I think everybody has obviously been paying quite a bit of attention to everything that's happening. Next week will be a very busy week. I think we know that. Certainly going to be very newsworthy with referendum on Tuesday, reconvene session on Wednesday, which will, I think, also be very interesting. This is obviously the first time Governor Spanberger will, people will be reacting to her amendments and to her vetoes. Typically, I think everybody could say this, that usually the party in power who has the same governor give a lot of deference to the governor's amendments and changes. We have been hearing, I think, some differences in opinion on that so far already. So I think it's going to be quite a busy and interesting day on Wednesday, which I think will probably lead us to what might happen on Thursday. There has been no movement on the budget. So while we might be gaveling in for a special session, there'll be nothing discussed about the budget that day. At the very least, what they'll be doing is just passing a procedural resolution about what they're going to talk about. I think our hope is that when they're all going to be in Richmond, that maybe there will be some discussions and there might be some movement, or at least some conversations between the speaker, Luke Torian, Senator Lucas, maybe the governor. Well, hopefully so some of that stuff will start happening, but nothing has happened to date. So no meetings between the conferees, not even like the Senate conferees haven't met and the House conferees haven't met, never mind across the houses. So there's been no movement. There is still an argument about the revenues, which I think you guys have all been hearing about with the data centers. And so the data centers have made numerous offers to Senator Lucas that have all been rejected. So I think that those negotiations are now over. The most recent ones were two different ways to get to $1 billion over the biennium, and those were rejected by Senator Lucas. So we're not moving in that direction, and without knowing what revenues we're going to have, we really can't do a budget. A couple other factors there. Governor Spanberger also vetoed the skill game legislation. And that was actually part of both the House and Senate budget from a revenue standpoint. So they were sort of counting on that revenue. So that will have to be removed from both budgets as well. And so there's just a lot of pieces that are kind of continuing to be in flux. With that, we are obviously paying very close attention to any movement at all. I've been trying to work on setting up some meetings, I think, after next week with the governor's policy office and the Secretary of Transportation, and just to kind of make sure that we can keep transit on everybody's minds, because obviously the operating and capital needs of WMATA, as well as statewide transit in the Northern Virginia bus systems, is critical to everybody as well. One bill I think that we are still talking about, and I'll probably defer to Senator Salim, who's in the room, is the bill dealing with transit and the unions. And that bill was amended by the governor. She added a reenactment clause, as well as a delay in one of the dates for when part of the contracts would be able to be dealt with. And so I don't know if Senator Salim, do you want to comment at all on that? Because that will be voted on Wednesday next week.
Yeah. Thank you for that update. And of course, for everyone here, it is likely that we will accept the amendments from the governor's office. When we crafted the bill, we realized to have it be enacted while the study was going to conflict with the outcomes to essentially get everyone at the table. So for that reason, that's where it's headed. I don't see a reason, unless I have not talked to the House patron about it either. But I do believe this is where it's going to be headed, and we will accept.
Okay, great. And just for some awareness, obviously one of the issues that MVTC has, I know a lot of the member localities had some concerns about the bill. It also dealt with transportation commissions, which was really more focused on PRTC. VRE had been a part of it. VRE was no longer included in the final bill just because they are trains, which is much different than bus systems. But the issue is as we're looking at transit budgeting and transit, money in general, this is going to be a big piece of that. And so making sure that we have that and take that into account as we're looking at statewide funding, to make sure that we're not undercounting what we need, so then we'd have to cut service. I think that's probably the most important piece, right? Is we don't want to make sure that with the money we're asking for is appropriate, and this bill would have to be a factor in that. And currently, it hasn't been. So I think it's important that DRPT takes a look at that, and we have better numbers, and when we're going forward and continuing to ask for additional funding, both from the state and the region. So. I think with that, I'm happy to take any questions that anybody has. If there's any additional comments, happy to do those too.
Any questions? All right, no questions in the room. Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you, Owen. I think now we're going to jump to our federal update from our executive director, Ms. Matthijs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And actually, before I do that, I did want to mention that we do have a new appointment to backfill behind Delegate Sickles. We did receive notification that Kirkwick Pike will be appointed to NBTC. So he will be coming to our May meeting and get officially sworn in. We still have a vacancy in the Senate. My understanding is very soon that Senate rules will be making that decision. So we obviously will have a senator coming in to replace Senator Evans' position. So stay tuned. So we may have a couple new commissioners joining us at our May meeting. But I did want to pivot a little bit to the federal side. Again, I think many of you know, other than discretionary grants, most of our local transit systems do not play in the federal space. But the reality is the funding of federal funding that's available to WMATA, to VRE, to OmniRide, and then also again to these competitive programs that many of our systems have bought buses, is a part of the infrastructure law that is about to expire at the end of September. Now, over history, it's usually not a problem for highway and transportation bills. They run for 5 years. Congress gets together. They put together a new package. The big issue for this year, and probably the first time in probably 30 years, is that there's actually not revenues identified to fill what is currently the Transportation Trust Fund. And in particular, and I think is very important to understand, mass transit is about 20% of that overall trust fund. During the next fiscal year, so federal fiscal year starting October 1, there will no longer be enough money in the transit account with the revenues that have already been identified to cover even mass transit. Highway is only 1 year behind. So there's a lot of conversation, or maybe not, and I actually do lean on Mr. Letourneau, who's actually doing a part of this in his day job, to talk a little bit about this and sort of where things are. But there is a very big hill to climb between now and the end of September. Mr. Letourneau, do you want to fill us in?
Well, no, it's Darian as well. He and
Okay, so say
he and I have sat in meetings unrelated to our work and public life related to this. So yeah, I work at the U.S. Chamber, which is a leading advocacy campaign on surface transportation reauthorization. As Kate said, expires end of September. The good news is there's been some progress. We expect the markup to begin April 29th. We haven't seen the bill text yet. We should see it very soon, within the next week or so. There's some talk. Chairman Graves is retiring, so this is kind of his last hurrah on doing this. He's got a good partner with Senator Capito on the Senate side, and it's possible he's put a certain number out. It sounds like the ranking member Larson may want to go a little bit higher than that number. We've tried to, in a lot of industry, including transit, has tried to really steer the conversation a little bit toward the structure, because gas tax is just a declining revenue source. And the more that we meet goals on higher MPG and electric vehicles and things like that, the more we hurt our ability to fund our infrastructure. And so the user fee concept has been floated as an alternative to that, and which would essentially be a registration fee that likely is collected at the state level, but would replace the gas tax. How you net it out on that depends on what type of vehicle you drive and how much you drive and those kind of things. We're likely not to see something that extreme in this upcoming effort, but what we probably will see is creeping into a fee on electric vehicles and potentially hybrid vehicles, because they are using road infrastructure, but they're not paying for it essentially through that tax. Most people probably think they pay more in federal gas tax than they actually do, because there's a whole bunch of taxes that are kind of added to it, and it's obviously not broken down when you gas up your vehicle. But there's going to be a long road ahead. The initial markup will kind of be the beginning of that legislative effort. We'll have to have obviously an effort in the Senate, and the timeline is September. So it is of great concern and importance across industries. I think there's a very good coalition of different entities ranging from business interests and what we would consider to be more vehicle automotive interests and transit interests, as well as a lot of the firms that service both, that have a lot of equities at stake and are very vocal in the debate. We've had roundtables with a number of members of Congress, T&I members all over the country, continuing to do that. So there's momentum and there's understanding, but getting anything done in this legislative environment is really hard. So that's going to be the question. So I don't know, Darren, if you have anything to add.
No, the only thing I'll add, right, in terms of like transit specifically, right, and Kate, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think that what we should be prepared to look at ourselves is that our friends in the House of Representatives will likely key most of the conversation as it relates to transit. The bits that I think not only some in industry, but even the banking committee itself is always surprised about is that the transit title, right, related to the surface transportation bill is actually in the banking committee in the Senate. And I think that it's, every 5 years that is a surprise to them. And so I think that Chairman Scott and Ranking Member Warren are probably going to be deferential to their colleagues in the House as it relates, just because of the fact that naturally in the House, the structure allows for almost all of the titles to be adjudicated, amongst themselves, and then the Senate just kind of say, hey, sure, right? Or unless, because neither Senator Warren nor Chairman Scott have a particularly strong opinion, I think, about these matters compared to their. So that's the only other thing I would say. I do think, though, is that we should be prepared for a series of extensions.
Mm-hmm.
A series of extensions, right? Is that that kind of delaying the date of enactment, right? Just because of the fact that I am bearish that something will come together by September, right? And actually, I do think that a series of extensions is actually one of the better outcomes, right, that we might be to be facing, right, versus a wholesale kind of grinding stop of these programs.
Make sure to put in a good word for hybrids after 2010.
Yes, hybrids after 2010. Yes, exactly. But the only other thing is the industry was doing the Lord's work on this topic last week. I know many in the transit space were here because of the APTA legislative conference, and that was a good effort to advocate not only for our individual systems and educate those members of Congress who are going to have to discuss this, right, who may not be familiar with these programs, but also talking about as a whole, right, why these programs are necessary, and why, as Mr. Letourneau has talked about, is that the kind of the need for how we reimagine revenue is going to be very, very important.
Thais, anything?
That is all, Mr. Chairman.
Questions, comments, concerns, anyone? All right, looks like we're going to go to our last item. I do have one thing to bring up, just a friendly reminder. CTB, Commonwealth Transportation Board, is actually meeting in Northern Virginia for the first time in like 2 or 3 years or something. And it's actually being hosted in Alexandria, much to my chagrin, because we were not informed. So I just wanted to put in on y'all's radar. CTB, May 19th and 20th. It'll be at the hotel, AKA, in like the North Old Town type of area. So if any of you want to show up, definitely encourage it. It's also the same time as the VTA.
It is.
So
The VTA board meeting, yes.
we'll see what happens.
Maybe a roadshow or a quick zoom down to Fredericksburg
Yeah.
for the VTA conference right after that.
Just that the express lanes will be in the opposite direction. So can't get you there in time.
Yes, we're working. We aspire to be at one point.
Well, yeah.
There may be carpool options.
All right. Sorry, I'm taking us on a huge sidebar here, but just want to remind everyone.
One more time.
May 19th and 20th. Yeah. Next committee meeting will be Thursday, June 18th, 6 p.m. Here. This room. Okay. I got thrown off by the sweet 2:30. I'm like,
This is sweet
this
2:30.
office. Having no further business, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.